Good day. My name is Nina Mazar, and today I want to talk to you about our moral pendulum, or how the social and moral actions that we engage in the here and now do not just happen in a vacuum, but actually affect our subsequent behaviors and decisions. So let's first engage in a short exercise. I would like you to think about a recent situation where you were tempted to go against your social and moral beliefs and where you gave in to that temptation. How did that make you feel, and do you think it changed how you subsequently behaved? And if so, how? Why? Well, I recently passed by a group of students that was raising money for a food bank, and here I found myself being tempted to be selfish because I was thirsty, I was tired, and I was thinking, I could use a change to buy myself a warm cup of tea. And in that moment, I'm ashamed to say, it just felt like the better idea, and I went with the cup of tea. But once I had the cup of tea and I had a few sips, I started to feel bad about myself, because that was not the person how I thought of myself. I had a different self-image of myself, and somehow, it didn't feel right. I should have used my change to actually donate that money to a good cause. So without really understanding what was happening, I subsequently found myself being particularly nice to other people. I would hold the door open, I would smile at other people, I would engage in small talk. And what I was basically doing is, I was compensating for my previous selfish behavior to re-establish my positive moral view of myself. And that's basically what a moral pendulum is. So the good news is that we are, in general, motivated to do good things. And sometimes when we transgress, that happens once in a while because there are a lot of temptations around us, then we will be highly motivated to compensate for those transgressions, to re-establish the positive view of ourselves. Now, unfortunately, the bad news is a pendulum swings both ways. So we are least likely to scrutinize the moral implications of our actions right after our moral self has just experienced a boost. So after we have engaged in a virtuous act, a good act, a moral act, so a good deed, it's highly likely that we feel very, very good about ourselves. And as a consequence, we have earned ourselves some moral credits or credentials that license ourselves to subsequently be more selfish if we find ourselves in a situation where we can benefit from them. And that's basically the question that my co-author, Chen-Bo Zong, and I, that we wanted to test. And we decided that we wanted to test it in the domain of green consumption because over the years, consumers have become increasingly attentive to social and ethical considerations. And this includes actually my co-author and me. And so we thought, well, maybe if people engage in green consumption and we moralize green consumption, that might lead to a licensing effect. But before we went out to test that, we actually first ran a very quick survey. We had half of our students rate how altruistic, how cooperative, how ethical they thought a person is that purchases conventional products. And we asked the other half of students to rate how they thought of a person that purchases organic and environment-friendly products on those same 3 dimensions. And what did we find? We actually did find that people thought that people who purchase green products, environment-friendly products, organic products, that they have higher moral and pro-social values. So in all 3 dimensions that we had, those people were rated higher than people who purchase conventional products. So based on that observation, we thought, okay, green consumption might actually lead to a licensing effect further down the road. And here's how we went out to test it. So we designed 2 online stores. One store that carried mainly conventional products, one store that carried mainly green products. Both stores had the same number of products, the same type of products, the same prices. And we simply randomly assigned half of our students to one store, the other half to the other store. But the students didn't know that both stores existed. They only saw this one store. And within each store type, half of our students were asked to simply browse through the store and then rate the products based on the design and on the informativeness of their description, while the other half was invited to purchase items. So we asked them choose products that you would like to purchase and put them into your shopping cart. You can do this with up to $25 in value. And we told them that 1 in every 25 students would be randomly selected to actually receive the items that they had in their cart for free from us. So half of the students basically were merely exposed to the products, while the other half of students, they actually made purchasing decisions. So that was the first part of the experiment. And then in the second part of the experiment, in an ostensibly unrelated task, we told participants that they would engage in something that has been coined the dictator game, actually in a variation of the dictator game. And what is the dictator game? Well, imagine you come to the lab and we tell you, you know what? You have been paired with an anonymous other person that is sitting in a different room. You will never find out who that other person is, and that other person will never find out who you are. And you know what? Randomly, you have been selected to play the role of the dictator. And as a dictator, we're giving you $6 for real. And you decide how much of these $6 you want to keep for yourself versus give to the other person in the other room. So you can decide. There is no right or wrong answer. And the nice thing about this very simple game is that since there isn't really any downside to not sharing any money because there are no social consequences, if you want, you can keep everything, so the entire $6. But if you do care about altruism, you will share. And so it's a very nice, simple task to measure how altruistic people are. So now, what did we find in our experimental session? We actually found that people who had just purchased in the green store, they ended up sharing significantly less money with their anonymous other person than those participants who had just purchased in the conventional store. And that fits very nicely with that licensing hypothesis. So the idea that those people who had just purchased green products, they felt very good about themselves. They pat themselves on the back, they felt morally superior, and that earned themselves the license to subsequently be a bit more selfish because it would not threaten their view that they had about themselves. Now, remember that we had a variation in that purchasing task. Only half of our participants actually were purchasing, right? The other half was only exposed to the products, so they could not really engage in a good deed. And for those participants who were merely exposed to the products, we actually did not find any licensing effect whatsoever. In fact, we actually found the opposite. So people who had purchased in the green store were sharing significantly more money with the anonymous other person than those who had purchased in the conventional store. And that fits very nicely with something that has been coined the priming effect. So a priming effect happens when subtle cues in the environment activate associated norms that then lead to corresponding behavior. So from my opinion, two of the coolest priming experiments show, for example, how exposure to the Apple logo increases creativity. And another one shows how exposure to pictures of exclusive upscale restaurants improves people's eating manners. And I think along similar lines, people who have been exposed to the green products, being exposed to the green products activated those higher moral norms that people seem to have when it comes to green products, and that led them to behave consistently with those beliefs and norms. Now you can say, okay, so what? So people who purchase in the green store, they were a bit less altruistic, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? And you would be right if you're saying that. But what my co-author and I were wondering was, well, how strong can the licensing effect actually get? Would it even make people transgress in such a way that they would engage in clear immoral transgressions such as lying or even stealing? And that's what we tested in our second experiment. So again, we had our two stores, the conventional store and the green store. This time, we only asked participants to purchase in either of those two stores. That was the first part of the experiment. And then in the second part of the experiment, the ostensibly unrelated task, we asked them to participate in a computer-based visual perception task. So how did that visual perception task look like? Imagine you're sitting in front of the computer, screen, and you see a box or a square on that computer screen. And that square is divided by one diagonal line. And for 1 second, you see 20 dots scattered inside that box. then they disappear, and you just simply have to say were there more dots on the left or more dots on the right side of that diagonal line. And imagine further that there are 90 such trials, and on each trial the pattern of the dots is very different. Now, what happens? Oh, I actually should say that people are extremely good at this task. They're very, very accurate because our visual perception is fairly good. But now what happens when we introduce a payment scheme such that every time you say that there are more dots on the left, you earn half a cent. Every time you say that there are more dots on the right, you earn 10 times the amount, 5 cents. So now I bet, oh, and let's imagine that the computer pays you regardless of your answer is correct or not. So now I bet when you see that there are more dots on the lower pay side, you will find yourself tempted to just simply say, hey, there were more dots on the right-hand side, so the higher pay side, and so that you earn more money. And that's what we wanted to see. We wanted to see, would people cheat for more money? What did we find? Well, consistent with the licensing effect, people who had just purchased in the green store, well, they actually ended up cheating significantly more for higher pay than those people in the conventional store. Actually, in fact, the people in the conventional store were completely honest. And not only that. So once the computer task was over, participants would see on the final screen how much money they earned, and they were instructed to pay themselves out of an envelope with cash that they would find on their desk. And what we wanted to see is, would people take out the amount of money that they see on the screen, or would they overpay themselves? So basically steal some money from us. And again, people who had just purchased in the green store also took out more money than what they were supposed to. So overall, because of lying and because of stealing, people in the green store overpaid themselves by about 83 cents more than those participants in the conventional store. And that might not seem like a lot, but it is a lot when you think about that if people were completely honest and accurate in that visual perception task, they would have made only about $2. So what's the morale of this research that I just presented to you? Well, if you're about to say that green people are bad people, that they are immoral and not social, think again, because that is not the takeaway. So it's not the takeaway simply because we did not compare green people to non-green people. We had the same group of students and we just randomly assigned them to one store or the other store. So the takeaway of our experiment is that if you engage in actions that produce a sense of moral glow, that make you feel superior, that then you're more likely to subsequently transgress. So you license yourself to transgress further down the road. So as long as we engage in behaviors that we moralize, such as, for example, purchasing green products, we will find the licensing effect. But if we do not moralize green consumption, if we were to engage in it just because it feels like the right thing to do, it is the norm, we don't pat ourselves on the back, then we would not expect the licensing effect. Then we would not expect to find the licensing effect. The licensing effect requires that you feel a boost to your self-concept. So the good news is that many of us want to do good, and that many of us think of themselves as good, pro-social, as moral human beings. We just need to be a bit cautious about when we engage in good behaviors, that we don't feel superior and that we don't feel like that we have done enough. Because if we feel that way, then we will be less motivated to continue doing good, and we'll be more likely to license ourselves to transgress further down the road. And I think even the most ethical ones among us, they can benefit from such kind of a self-reflection from time to time. And that's basically all I have to tell you about the moral pendulum. Thank you.